Greetings, I'm your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. For all the returning listeners and subscribers, thank you for coming back. To those new to the channel, thank you for taking a moment to check us out. If you dig what we're doing, please hit like and, of course, subscribe. It goes a long way in promoting the channel. That being said, let's bring in my co-host, my homie, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour. He is the... Oops. He is the... You guys are so excited. The Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
Got a good one tonight.
I know.
I know you probably have a battery of questions to ask about Haiti on this one.
I got some stuff.
Just a few things in the question arsenal. Speaking of another Haitian that might have some things to say, she is the faceless voice of reason on this show, who put this show together. Please welcome M. Toussaint.
Hello. How are you tonight?
I'm okay, Red Plastic. You said I was wearing this for fall.
Yeah.
Fall in Mexico?
We have fall, okay?
It's
Different
important
than your fall. Okay.
Well, how are things in Florida, Pascal?
Yes, tell us.
In my neck of the woods, things are okay. Some people suffered major loss and damage. A lot of people are without power. Over 1 million people are without power. And we were fortunate where I am.
That's good. I don't know how to change the font. I was trying to change it. Sorry.
I found that's a new feature they added, is changing the font, and I've just been changing it to ridiculous things. I have no idea what these fonts are, so I'll just change it to it.
You did it? I put it on default, and it gave me, what is this, Comic Sans or something?
I don't think it's Comic Sans.
Oh, it's Dynapuff.
It's Dynapuff.
Let's go back to default. Thank you.
Why would you do that?
Because no one can read Dynapuff.
Why can't they read Dynapuff, man?
Because it's Puff, the magic dragon.
Look, you can read that, can't you?
Unbelievable.
I'll stop. But let's get serious for a second here. Today, we turn our attention to a timely and critical exploration of Canada's role in global politics through the lens of our guest today, Owen SCHALK, and Yves Engler's provocative new book, Canada's Long Fight Against Democracy. Contrary to the prevailing narrative that paints Canada as a neutral force for good on the world stage, our guests peel back the veneer to reveal a disturbing history of Canadian complicity in the subversion of democratic movements and the bolstering of the US-led imperialism and anti-communism. The authors detail Canada's extensive involvement in overthrowing elected governments, aligning with US hegemonic interests rather than standing up for the very democratic principles the nation claims to defend. This book serves as a scathing indictment of Canada's foreign policy, which has all too often supported either passively or actively the dismantling of progressive governments. As they write, as we will show, Canada has passively supported the ouster or actively contributed to the overthrow of at least 20 elected governments. Ottawa passively supported the removal of Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, Guatemalan President Jacobo Arbenz in 1954, Dominican Republic leader Juan Bosch in 1963, Brazilian President João Goulart in 1964, Indonesian President Suharto in 1966, Ugandan President Milton Obote in 1971, Paraguayan leader Fernando Lugo in 2012, Brazilian leader Dilma Rousseff in 2016, and Peruvian President Pedro Castillo in 2022. It's a hell of a lineup. Our guests also expose Canada's broader role in supporting military interventions that have thwarted progressive leadership in countries like Colombia, Greece, highlighting the nation's ongoing contributions to global neoliberal and imperialist projects. This is far from the image of Canada as a benign middle power. Instead, we see a country deeply entangled in Western imperialism, often to the detriment of democratic movements. Today, we'll explore these issues, challenge Canada's role in global politics, and reflect on the implications of this history for the present. What does this mean for Canada's political identity and its ongoing involvement in US-led global dominance? We'll delve into the specifics outlined in the book to understand how Canadian foreign policy has undermined democratic sovereignty across the globe. Please welcome our guest, friend of show, hasn't been on in a while, Owen SCHALK.
Hello, happy to be with you.
And his co-writer, Eve Angler. Owen and Eve, how are you?
Oh, doing good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good. Pascal, I know you have some questions you want to get out right now.
Yeah, I want to ask one general question. First of all, I thought your book was excellent in exposing an aspect of Canada that often goes unknown to most people in the world. One of the things that we were just talking about in the green room was about how Canada has this image of a bastion of progressive, humane, kind of the alter ego of the United States. When the America is seen as this kind of imperialist power, even within progressive circles, but multicultural circles, the Native movement, Canada is always positioned itself as this kind of humane alternative to the United States. Can you explain to me and to the audience how Canada is able to manufacture this image in the light of its imperial foreign policy legacy? And is this an intentional caricature that it puts out?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I can start, and then Eve, you can pick up anything I miss. I think in a way this speaks to the power of myth. Canadian leaders, they're very good at and they're very focused on projecting that myth that you described, that Canada is a uniquely democratic or even a uniquely benevolent actor on the world stage. It's a country that wherever it goes, it promotes human rights, democracy, feminism, etc. But of course, like the US, Canadian foreign policy is driven by corporate interests. It's driven by geopolitical concerns. It's driven by this broader imperialist desire to stifle governments that want to dismantle colonial or neo-colonial structures, governments that champion Pan-Africanism or pursue Latin American integration, basically governments that do anything that might undermine the US-led capitalist world order. And I think one of the things that's important to consider when talking about how Canada was able to build up this myth is the fact that unlike Britain or other European powers, Canada never really had a formal empire. Unlike the US, Canada didn't really have this history of bloody interventions in Latin America, for example. And this was something that Canadian leaders identified during the Cold War. They said this in discussions with the US, with other Western powers, that Canada doesn't have this baggage that other imperial powers do. And so that will equip it to stand on a different footing when it talks to global South leaders. Canada can come in and say, we don't have this imperial baggage. We never colonized you. We're the kind face of capitalism, basically. And I think not having that history was very important in allowing Canada to build up this brand. And I think, Eve, if you want to add anything, you should go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's Canada has a big propaganda apparatus. It's also, the two dominant colonial languages, English and French, are spoken here, and Canada's been a big player in all kinds of international forums where it's promotes its perspective. There's an element of it that for Canadians at least, it's sort of when you compare Canadian foreign policy to U.S. foreign policy, it is better. It's sort of it's an easy bar to compare to. it's a low bar. So right, there's some of that. But it's crafted, right? Like if you go back to one of the important parts of the Canadian foreign policy myth of peacekeeping, this idea that Canada was a big peacekeeping force. The peacekeeping mission of 1956, where then Foreign Minister Lester Pearson wins the Nobel Peace Prize, it's literally an idea that John Foster Dulles put forward to Canada's foreign minister to basically extricate the British and the French from this disastrous invasion of Egypt that the U.S. didn't support, and Canada came in to basically assist the U.S. To extricate the former colonial powers, because Washington was the new power in the region and didn't want French and British influence. And so that became like a founding kind of 40, 50 years that was central to this idea of Canada benevolent force internationally. But it really was just to help Washington in its geopolitical game at that time. It's part of that. There are small things that are truths in that, right? Justin Trudeau was on the Colbert Report, I believe. The Canadian Prime Minister was on the Colbert Report 2 weeks ago or so, and when he was at the UN in New York, and he was all about talking about Canada's Medicare system, the universal health care, and sort of this playing to a liberal U.S. audience of wouldn't it be great to have universal health care, and which is true. It's better to have it than not. Lots of problems with Canada's universal health care, but it's better to have it than not. But that's not very. That's fairly superficial in terms of what the founding of Canada was about. Was about Europeans stealing Indigenous land, and Canadian foreign policy, since there's been a Canadian foreign policy, has been about expanding empire, advancing white supremacy, and advancing Canadian corporate interests globally.
Toussaint, did you want to add anything?
Oh no, I'm so glad that was addressed though, because I have wondered this for a very, very long time. I definitely learned plenty in reading the book, but I was aware that Canada had their involvement in a lot of nefarious things internationally.
I want to start off. I didn't know about Canada's involvement with the overthrow of Mossadegh. Canada's passive support of the U.S.-backed coup against Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953 set a troubling precedent. How did Canada's role in this and other coups shape its subsequent foreign policy alignment with the U.S.? I believe you guys say in the book, Ottawa's silence during the 1953 coup in Iran signaled its tacit endorsement of Western intervention against democratic governments.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that example, Mossadegh in 1953, at this time, Canada was becoming more and more aligned with the U.S. It was still kind of an appendage of the British Empire in a way, but when World War II ends, Canada is drifting closer and closer to the U.S. empire. And with this coup in Iran, it comes when Mossadegh nationalizes Iranian oil, which is something that really, really terrifies the UK and the US. And Canada's tacit support for the coup, it signaled that Canada would either passively support these overthrows of nationalist leaders that got on the bad side of the US and the UK, like Mossadegh, or it would actively support their overthrow. And we lay out in later examples in the book, examples where Canada is actually involved in helping to orchestrate the coup and helping the coup government then consolidate power. With this specific example of Iran, though, it's more of a passive support. It's helping to demonize Mossadegh and then legitimize the coup after it happens and after the Shah kind of takes total power in the country. Eve, did you have anything else to add?
No, not really. But I think it's politically important today in the context of all the demonization of Iran, and the Canadian officials will go on and about Iran's being authoritarian, undemocratic place. Well, Canada helped, not massively, but passively overthrowing Iranian democracy, and was happy to work with and support a authoritarian Shah for the next decades, brutal Shah for the next decades, so long as it was aligned with Western geostrategic interests. And then, post 79, when it's a government that's viewed as offside with the empire, then all of a sudden we were on about it being authoritarian and undemocratic. But the government has no problem with that. So it's particularly a relevant history to discuss in the context of what is clearly an escalating war, and the Canadian government in recent days has very much legitimated this expected Israeli attack against Iran.
So does Canada echo the U.S.'s sentiment? Recently, Kamala Harris was in, I think it was a 60 Minutes interview, where she was asked kind of an odd question to me, like, what's the biggest threat to America? And she said Iran. I think she says Iran. I don't know if she said Iran. And I think that's a bipartisan consensus with both parties seeing Iran as the great big bad in the Middle East. Does Canada echo these sentiments as well with their foreign policy?
Yeah. I mean, it's the same kind of dynamic. Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, who is looking like he'll be the next prime minister, but he's not. He's out of office right now. He's actually gone on record. Yes, hit Iran's nuclear facilities. He just said that, and he doubled down on that. And even though Biden officially is sort of wavering a little bit on that, and Foreign Minister Joly has been a bit more cautious in her statement, but Canada's defense minister said it would be appropriate for Israel to attack Iranian oil facilities. And this is, the dynamic here is that when Israel attacks Iran, like it did in April, where it hit the diplomatic compound in Damascus and killed 15 people, including some top Iranian military officials, it's silence from the Canadian government. And in fact, in that case, the Canadian embassy, which is closed in Damascus, its windows were blown out by the Israeli attack. And still the Canadian government's totally silent about the Israeli attack. Then when Iran responds, there's a condemnation of this terrorist government. And Canada has enlisted the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, most of Iran's military, as a terrorist organization 3 or 4 months ago. And doesn't have diplomatic relations with Iran. That goes back about a decade now. And so, it's totally aligned in this anti-Iran policy. And of course, the other side to that is a pro-Israel kind of policy. But when you look at it through the historical lens, the hypocrisy of the Canadian position is quite stark.
Pascal, do you want to add anything?
Yes, and in terms of that policy towards Iran, do you think that Canada would follow the United States in its footpaths towards a more kind of belligerent posture towards Iran in the face of what's going on between Israel and Iran right now?
I think absolutely. I think they currently are following the U.S. in this increasing belligerence toward Iran. This whole regional war that really started on October 7th, Canada has been right in there supporting Israel, supporting the U.S. from the very beginning. Right after October 7th, Canadian weapons shipments to Israel skyrocketed when solidarity camps started springing up around the country in support of the Palestinians. Police dealt with them in a very brutal and heavy-handed fashion. As public pressure increased on Ottawa to end these arms shipments, Ottawa then announced a quote-unquote arms embargo on Israel, which was really a sham because it did not include weapon sales that had already been approved by the Canadian government. And arms to Israel keep flowing, even as Israel expands the war into Lebanon, even as Nicaragua has announced that it's taking Canada to the International Court of Justice for potentially fueling genocide with its arms shipments to Israel. It's a terrible policy, and it totally mirrors the U.S., differing only in the fact that Canada can't send more aid to Israel because it doesn't have the means. I think if it did have the means, it would be doing what the U.S. is doing. Absolutely.
How do you guys feel about the International Court of Justice as far as them actually enacting any sort of quote unquote justice when it comes to kind of calling people out on war crimes?
I mean, Eve may have a more nuanced view on this. To me, it seems largely symbolic at this point, especially when it comes to Israel. I don't know, Eve, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the court doesn't have the ability to enforce, and obviously the U.S. veto at the Security Council undermines that, and Israel just operates with impunity because the governments that have the power, the ruling on the legality of the occupation and what countries' responsibility were under international law in response to Israel's occupation. That came down about 3 months ago now. And it was quite an expansive ruling from the court, basically finding that Israel is the occupying power in Gaza, obviously the occupier power in the West Bank. And it wasn't actually a ruling, it was a slightly different language used, but the decision was that countries basically have to not be enabling that those occupations, and that Israel should end its occupation immediately. Now, Canada has like innumerable ways in which it supports the occupation. Obvious things like the Canada Free Trade Agreement with Israel that includes products from the occupied West Bank entering as if it's part of Israel. That's a really crass way in which Canada should just end that. Even the European Union doesn't operate; their trade agreement doesn't operate the same way. Canada's registered charities in this country that support projects in the occupied West Bank. There's all these kind of things that should be basically, according to International Court of Justice ruling, advisory opinion, I think is the actual terminology. This should end. It should end, immediately. But the Canadian government just ignores it. And this is a Canadian government that its entire foreign policy, the Trudeau government's sort of their main rhetorical justification was the international rules-based order. They pushed that notion. That was what drove their foreign policy aggressively. A little bit less so over the past year for obvious reasons. So they just ignore the decision of the ICJ. So the rulings have been good, both with regards to the South African case and this case that was actually brought by the General Assembly. But the powers that be just ignore the law.
Pascal, what do you say about that International Court?
I think the International Court only has enough power, as much power as these Western imperialists will allow it to have. And I think the notion that the International Court, which is largely an attempt by members of the global South to hold Western imperial nations at bay, is not going to be effective unless they get a major power in the world to back them to get sanctions on these countries, either whether it be Russia or China, or to give balance. Because the West, you have to understand, they have the economic and the political muscle to really combat the ability of the countries that are making up the ICG in terms of reprisals for them making judgments against them. So it's kind of a catch-22.
Well, moving on to Latin America. In the cases of Guatemala's Arbenz and Brazil's Goulart, Canada aligned with the U.S. Cold War interests. How did Canada's involvement in Latin America during the Cold War reinforce the region's anti-communist dictatorships? quote, Canada played the role of quiet enabler in Latin America, providing a veneer of respectability to the U.S.-led efforts to topple democratic regimes.
Yeah, I mean, Canada's role in Latin America during the Cold War was huge. You mentioned Guatemala, the coup against Jacobo Arbenz. Canada was very prominent in demonizing Arbenz at the time. And then after his removal by the military, we quote Peter McFarlane, a Canadian journalist, who said that there was absolute elation and celebration in Canadian boardrooms and in the External Affairs Ministry over the fact that Arbenz had been ousted. And this, red tide had been stemmed in Central America. There was Chile in 1973. This was a big one. Canada was quite involved in the isolation of Allende.
Can you explain Canada's involvement in the ouster of Allende in Chile?
Yeah, so there was the demonization angle of Allende. Pierre Trudeau, who was in power at the time, worked with Washington to kind of, I forget exactly what happened at the moment, but it was imposing economic isolation, which is something that we've seen regularly, most recently with Venezuela, of course. So Canada worked to demonize Allende. They worked to isolate his government economically and diplomatically. And then when the coup happened in 1973, there was a Canadian official on the ground at the time, I believe the ambassador, who, as with the coup against Arbenz, was very pleased with the outcome. And in a cable that he sent at the time, he said that Pinochet had the, quote, probably thankless task of sobering Chile up. And he referred to Allende's supporters as the riffraff of the Latin American left. And then, of course, after the coup against Allende, Canadian mining companies poured into Chile. They were the largest national contingent of mining companies that arrived after Pinochet took power. And they still benefit from the neoliberalism that was imposed on Chile after 73. And there were other examples of Canadian-supported coups. There was the Dominican Republic, where Canadian support was more passive for the ouster of Juan Bosch, but still definitely supportive. There have been other examples. Bolivia in 2019, Canada helped to demonize and isolate Evo Morales and to justify the military moving against him. There have been so many. Eve might have some more that are slipping my mind at the moment, but these are the ones that stand out to me as most prominent right now.
The big 800-pound gorilla in the room that I think myself and Tucson are interested in the Latin America, South America, Caribbean region is stamped directly to the Ottawa Accord, 2003-2004, and the ouster of Bertrand Aristide. And I'm very, very familiar with Canada's role in that, and also the role of Canada in gold mining in Haiti and wealth extraction in Haiti subsequent to that as well. Can you guys talk about Canada's role in Haitian politics and their role in the Aristide ouster, and particularly the role of Canadian mining interests in getting involved in what's going on in Haiti as well?
Yeah, Eve, you wrote a book on this one, so maybe you can take that.
History. I haven't published a history of Canada's role in Haiti that it goes back to Saint-Domingue and slave relations between current day Canada and Saint-Domingue economy and some of that. But so Canada has a long history in Haiti. Today, it really is the second power after the U.S. Maybe prior to 2004 coup, maybe France was a bigger player, but probably not since Jean-Claude Duvalier. At least I would say that Canada's been increasingly the sort of second power, and definitively so. And the first thing to sort of say, like, there's been lots of protests it's regular to protest at the Canadian embassy in Port-au-Prince. There's been instances where Molotov cocktails have been thrown into the embassy in Port-au-Prince, burning Canadian flags, stuff like that, which is very, that's not common to happen around the world. In the mining sector, it is fairly common, and a little bit in Palestine. But Canada, the Ottawa Initiative in Haiti is this meeting that happens on January 31st and February 1st of 2003, where the then Jean Chrétien government liberal government brings together top official from the George W. Bush administration, minister from the French government, from the Organization of American States, where they discuss Haiti's future. No one from Haiti's elected government or we know of, no Haitian was there to discuss Haiti's future. And at that meeting, which was reported on March 15th, 2003 by L'Actualité, which is a Quebec corporate news magazine, they decided that Aristide must go, Haiti should be put under UN trusteeship, and the Haitian military should be recreated. Of course, 13 months after the coup, Aristide was forced onto a plane in the middle of the night by U.S. Marines with Canadian Special Forces at the Toussaint Louverture airport. And he was dumped in the Central African Republic. It wasn't just Aristide. There were 7,000 elected officials that all were basically driven out of their elected positions. The UN essentially ran Haiti for the next 13 years. It was a formal UN occupation force. UN still, of course, has significant influence in the country. And the Haitian military sort of recreated, not really, but the police force was former military were heavily integrated into police force. So Canada played an important role in consolidating the international forces that would perpetrate the 2004 coup. You go back before that, though, Canada played a role in the whole demonization of the elections of May 2000. And there was what I consider one of the most impressive imperial propaganda feats of the 21st century was there was elections in May of 2000, and they used this to demonize Aristide, but Aristide was neither running in the elections nor was he in government, and so he wasn't in any way overseeing the elections. And basically a handful of Famille Lavalas wins 80% of all the thousands of elected positions, mayors, Senate positions, etc. And there's eight positions where, according to one version of the way you interpret the Haitian Constitution, there should have been a runoff election. Famille Lavalas would have won the seats anyways. But after, and the OAS, Organization of American States, initially says this election is a great election, high turnout, all went well. And they basically, then when the opposition gets trounced, they start talking about this problem in these seats that there should have been a runoff election. They whip this whole thing into a big affair. The opposition uses that to boycott the presidential election, which is happening later in the year, which they knew they had zero chance of winning. Aristide was going to win by many times, and they used that to cut off aid, right? So under Préval, they had the Inter-American Development Bank had agreed to this big aid package. They used this supposed electoral illegitimacy in some Senate seats to then justify cutting off aid. Canadian officials are right in the middle of this. The Organization of American States, through Canadian that participate in the electoral observation, just like the OAS, that got a lot of attention. The OAS's role in Evo Morales's downfall, the coup in 2019, but OAS played a much bigger role in Haiti in 2000. Has gotten very little proper sort of documentation. But yeah, so Canada played this important role in destabilizing Aristide, funding opposition groups. All kinds of money, right? Millions of dollars channeled to opposition, cut off all this funding to Aristide. And then immediately after, there's a Gérald Lartotu, who had been living in Florida for 15 years, who's like put in place after the ouster of the elected government. All of a sudden, Canadian aid, flows back in. So we cut off aid because there was supposedly some minimal electoral problems. And now you have a government with no pretense of electoral legitimacy, and all of a sudden the aid comes back in, of course, because it was our government. It was the one that was put in by Washington and Ottawa. And we backed this coup, and Canada's right at this. They lead the policing part of the UN mission for many years. And in that early phase, it's incredibly violent, right? We're integrating former military into the police as they are massacring people, principally in Port-au-Prince. Demanding the return of the elected government. And Canadian officials, fund this. They train, they oversee it, they justify it. Really, kind of like every facet of Haitian life. Like the deputy justice minister during the coup government is a employee of the Canadian Aid Agency. So that the minister is an employee of USAID. The deputy, and this is when there's all these political prisoners. There's obviously the police are killing people. So it became certainly after 2004 very much a sort of basically Canadian colony, and right until today with the core group, right? This core group where you have foreign ambassadors that have all this influence over Haitian life, and after Jovenel Moïse is assassinated, they 3 years ago, who gets picked? Ariel Henry. There's a three-way power battle, and Ariel Henry becomes the leader because there's a tweet put out by the core group, and the core group says no, it's not these two, it's this guy, and he becomes the leader, and further disintegration of the country. So it's not recognized in Canada hardly at all. But Canada is this incredibly powerful force. If you read Le Nouvelliste and major Haitian media, I joked about this. Sébastien Carrière, the Canadian ambassador until fairly recently, he's like on the front page of the Haitian paper, like regular. If he goes to Walking at Global Affairs Canada, almost nobody knows who he is. Just like almost nobody in Canada knows what the core group is. But in Haiti, 12-year-old kids know what the core group is. There's graffiti down what core group is. But that's the nature of imperialism is that in the imperial center, you don't even know, the general population don't even know that the imperial process is taking place. But where they're victims, of course, it's a different story.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the core group?
The core group is basically a consortium of almost every Western embassy coming out of the UN, the United States, France, Canada, the EU. All of these Western powers are all basically overlords over the affairs of what's going on in Haiti, with Canada, the United States, and France playing the frontman. Spain, all of these countries have it's basically all of the Western powers in NATO consorted into this power base to govern the affairs of Haiti and deny Haiti of any sovereignty. If you want to have a better definition than me, please go ahead.
And the core group formally comes out of it's been claimed that the informal launch of the core group is the Ottawa Initiative on Haiti in 2003. Formally, it comes out of an actual UN resolution after the ouster of Aristide, right? And of course, the ouster of Aristide there's U.S. troops, French troops, Canadian troops, and a very small number of Chilean troops that basically invade the country, right? They get the UN Security Council to give this quick okay, but they're already on the ground before that okay comes, and then that ad hoc foreign force becomes the MINUSTA, the UN, a formal UN mission, which is there from I think it's formally April 2004 until 2017, and then amidst that creation of the MINUSTA, the UN formally creates this group called the core group, and the idea is this sort of like benevolent transition force. But what it basically is, I mean, and it's been pointed out regularly in Haitian social media, they're all like white guys, white or sometimes women, but they're basically all white, giving their input on Haitian affairs, and not just abstractly. Their input tends to trickle its way down into what becomes policy, and it would be equivalent as if, and as J'Afrique Haiti, Jean Saville, a prominent actors in Haitian community, says, like they appoint. If you look at who they've appointed as leadership, so like Michel Martelly, they played an important role in 2010. in imposing Michel Martelly, and he connects it to like if the people like this Mom Boucher was the former head of the famous head of the Hell's Angels in Canada, or Carla Homolka, who was this a serial killer. That these are the people they appoint to lead Haiti, right? And so, like, what a surprise that things don't go well in Haiti when this is the people that you prop up, this is the people you put in place, and so the core group is it's a kind of neo-colonial entity, and it's like as if there was like a body in Ottawa that had the Congolese ambassador, the Guatemalan ambassador, the Ghana's ambassador, Indonesia's ambassador, and they got together and they said this should be the next head of the police force. This should be the and this is what happens in Haiti, and it passes without almost any comment in certainly in Canadian media.
And what's really infuriating to me is that people ask, well, why is Haiti so messed up? What's the problem? Haiti has no sovereignty. You're talking about a country where the decisions about the country are literally made by Western powers, who ensure that the country stays in this chasm of destruction and poverty, because they either want to extract resources from it because there are resources to be found, or they're not interested in Haitians having any kind of representative democracy that gives them the will to try to create their own destiny, because there's never been an attempt, besides maybe Aristide, to have an actual government in Haiti that tries to redistribute wealth to the massive peasant population, who have always been left outside of the actual economic reality of the country, largely because not only of the core group, but because of the oligarchy that we have in Haiti, which is largely people who aren't even originally from Haiti, many of them from the Middle East, that lords over the country's economy, which is not uncommon to most Caribbean and Latin American countries, but it's particularly has a noxious kind of connotation in Haiti because of the history of the country as being this kind of bastion of liberty and freedom, when in reality, it's one of the places where there's the least expression of democracy you can find in the Western Hemisphere.
Did you want to add anything to that, Yves?
Well, I mean, I completely agree. And if you look at, from to talk about the mining stuff, Canada's the mining global powerhouse, right? So half of the world's mining companies are based in Canada. And in Haiti, at one point, there was a Canadian company, Saint Genevieve, who had prospecting rights for 10% of all Haitian territory. And there is, one of the angers of Canadian capital against Aristide was based on the perception. There was a Canadian company began prospecting, KWG, and this is in the mid-90s, and basically there was peasant opposition. And this was a time when Aristide actually wasn't in office, and he was perceived to have kind of allied with the peasant opposition to the mining company. So there's some of that with regards to Canadian interest in Haiti. And if you look at in the Dominican, just across the border, it is Barrick Gold, the most important Canadian mining company that is a big player there with their Pueblo Viejo mine. And so there are resources. The perception is there are a fair bit of resources to be had in Haiti. The actual extraction process hasn't really happened. I would say the more important capitalist interest that Canada has in Haiti is in the basically having Black women make $5 a day stitching T-shirts, right? And Canada's Guild and Activewear, it's been the second biggest employer in Haiti for many years, and it's an apparel company, and if you look at what happened in 2004, the biggest subcontractor to Gildan was André Aped's apparel companies. André Aped, of course, is of Middle Eastern background, oligarch, if you like. He was the head of the Group of 184, the main civil society opposition to the elected government that was basically working to destabilize Aristide in conjunction, of course, with the foreign powers. And so they were really angry with Aristide for doubling the minimum wage in 2003. So Canadian corporate interests in Haiti have been opposed to any steps towards increasing the minimum wage. And that's definitely an element in the background of the hostility to, you know, when you look at the Aristide government, we're not, this isn't socialism, right? This is, you know, this isn't even by, you know, I don't know, by Scandinavian or maybe Canadian social democracy standards. These are really, really modest reforms. But you have this elite that, you know, works in tandem with the foreign powers that is, you know, completely anti-national, that's completely racist, that is really just, you know, disconnected from the vast majority of Haitians, sort of, you know, and so any modest reform, or even the notion of the you know, the tout monde c'est monde, right? All people are people. Even
it goes back to Dessalines. All people, yeah. Everybody, all people are people.
Yeah, and so you want to crush that, and that's what they've wanted to do. And then there's the, you know, the kind of background of all this is the, of course, the punishment of Haiti for its central role in you know, the one of the most world-changing events. You know, certainly the most important example of human liberation in the history of humanity, which of course is the Haitian Revolution, which had just shattering impact throughout the hemisphere. And there's always been a current of punishing Haiti for that. And of course, the on the 200th anniversary of independence, that's when the coup happened. And one of the things that Aristide did was to demand the French repay that the odious ransom, where those who won their independence by blood had to pay the slave masters for lost property, which of course was the human beings that were enslaved.
Yeah, and if I could just quickly add, I mean, Yves said it with much more erudition and historical detail than I could have, but you know, Canadian companies have been active in Haiti for so long. I mean, Canadian mining companies have been there since like the 1950s. And mining, as Yves pointed out, that was an element of Canadian opposition to Aristide, or rather Aristide's position toward the mining sector spurred Canadian opposition, as did his position toward the workers at, you know, Gildan Activewear sweatshops. But what we saw after Aristide's overthrow in 2004 was actually more reforms to the mining sector that opened it up in a bigger way than it had been before then. So in 2013, when Michel Martelly is in power, the new mining law passes in Haiti, and that opens up the sector even more to foreign investment into Canadian companies. And that's something that we see all the time in these coups that Canada supports, whether it's Ghana or Guatemala, Honduras in 2009. Canada supports the overthrow of these governments when they put constraints on the ability of Canadian capital to profit. And then after the troublesome leader is removed, whether it's Aristide or Manuel Zelaya or Salvador Allende or Suharto in Indonesia, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, once that government is removed, Canada comes in and it just reaps even more benefits than it was before.
Well, Yves, I know you have to tuck someone in.
Yes, I can go.
It's getting a little late, and I thank you so much for staying a little later than we thought you were going to be able to stay. You want to say anything in closing? Does your little guy want to say anything in closing?
I'd love to hear about your book on Haiti, by the way.
I'll send a copy along when it gets published. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you.
Have a very good. You two have a very good night, and sweet dreams, little person. Let's actually, we brought up Indonesia, and I did want to talk a little bit about Indonesia. The book highlights Canada's support of Indonesia's Suharto regime after the 1965 to 66 coup that resulted in mass killings. How did Canada benefit economically from its ties to Suharto's dictatorship, and how did it justify its actions internationally? You guys say Canada's trade interest with Indonesia took precedent over any concerns for human rights, exposing the hypocrisy of its foreign policy.
Yeah, so this is another very eye-opening example. Sukarno was really the founding father of Indonesia, the liberation leader. When he's in government, he really unites this very large and disparate country in a way that I think a lot of people would have struggled to do. And I think he did struggle to do it, but he managed to create this nation called Indonesia. And to do so, he allied with different sectors of Indonesian society. The left, he allied in certain ways with the communists, he allied with the Islamists.
Wow.
And he really tried to bring the country together. But in allying with the left, he completely alienated the US, obviously. He alienated Canada. And when the 1965 coup happens that brings Suharto to power, the US, I mean, we all know the US was very involved in the mass killing that followed, the killing of hundreds of thousands of people. Canada's role was less hands-on, as far as I know. If there's documentation on Canada having an active role in those mass killings, it's not out yet, to my knowledge. But Canada did rhetorically support Suharto's seizure of power, supported the repression of the left and the mass killings that followed. And the Canadian ambassador to Indonesia actually described Suharto as a moderate and progressive leader and somebody that they could support, even though he had just massacred, I think modest estimates are about 500,000 people.
Insane.
And then, I mean, what followed, it's like what I said about Aristide, about Zelaya, about all these people. Suharto opens up the economy to foreign investment, and Indonesia has a lot of mineral wealth. And so Canadian mining companies pour into the country, and they have very significant investments in the country, investments that are often opposed by locals, that cause massive ecological damage, that are very anti-democratic in their implementation. But Canada was fine with it. I mean, Suharto benefited Canadian business. And then when Suharto invaded East Timor and committed more atrocities, mass killings there, Canada didn't speak out against it. In fact, Canada was selling massive amounts of weapons to Suharto at the same time. And the weapon sales kept going into the 80s, into the 90s. They peaked under Jean Chrétien, the liberal prime minister, in the 90s. Massive amounts of weaponry going to this government's killing machine. But Canada didn't say anything about it. Canada, the supposed paragon of human rights, of diversity, of feminism in foreign policy, all this stuff, this government didn't speak out against the atrocities of Suharto, and in fact benefited from these atrocities in so many ways.
Dusan, do you want to add anything?
I have a question in general. I've read books like this about the United States and watched documentaries about just the history of what our government has done, particularly in foreign policy. And I don't know how those authors and documentarians manage it, but in Canada, are you safe for having written this book? Like, are you going to not get
Well, it's on an
nailed?
independent publisher, right? It's a smaller publisher, or is this
Smaller publisher in Quebec.
Mhm.
I think Eve has faced a lot more trouble with the law than I have. Although I did recently learn that CSIS, the Canadian equivalent of the CIA, has opened an investigation into me because I requested to see my file, and they said that they can't show it to me because it's an ongoing investigation. But I think I'm serious. Yeah. They said it's a national security issue and it relates to the repression of subversive activities, apparently. So the Canadian government does consider me a subversive, according to this reply that I got from CSIS. But Eve has faced a lot more repression from the law than I have, because, I mean, if you go on his Twitter page, he's constantly confronting politicians in person, yelling at them, getting roughed up by the police, getting arrested. I know he was visited by the RCMP for his activities. So there is this element to it that I do think about, that I know Eve thinks about. But it doesn't stop us from doing the work that we do. I imagine that in the US, the repression is similar. The surveillance is similar as well, if not more severe. It's something that we have.
Does it feel a little, speaking to that point, we were talking about this on the show the other night, almost said Kanye West. What's that black guy's name that we don't like?
Ta-Nehisi Coates.
There you go. Close enough. Ta-Nehisi West. Ta-Nehisi Coates was recently on an American morning show, very popular American morning show. And even him, someone that's extremely liberal, extremely friendly to the Democratic Party, I would not call Ta-Nehisi Coates a radical by any stretch of the imagination. But that's how he was framed on the show. He was kind of bombarded, attacked, if you will, to the even the surprise of other co-hosts on the show. Being, I think one of them said, if I'm not mistaken, they read his chapter in the book about Palestine and felt like it could have been in the backpack
Of an extremist.
of an extremist. Are there similar things going on in Canada, or are your intellectual celebrities, we have to sadly admit that's a thing in the 21st century, especially in the era of media consumption through the internet, are your intellectual celebrities kind of suffering these similar fates?
I mean, I did hear about the Ta-Nehisi Coates interview. I didn't see it personally, but it did sound pretty insane. And right now, I can't think about a comparable example that happened like on a Canadian talk show recently. But by and large, the Canadian media, for sure, the mainstream media is rabidly anti-Palestinian. And I mean, there's the National Post, which is our right-wing paper, the most popular right-wing paper. And it has been absolutely insane in its demonization of anybody even remotely associated with Palestine solidarity. Right now, there's a push amongst the Conservative Party to have certain Palestinian solidarity organizations labeled as terrorist organizations.
Insane.
And the Liberal government has said they are mulling all possibilities on that proposal. Wow. So it's very bad. I mean, with CBC, CTV, all these Canadian news organizations, they sort of spearheaded the purging of pro-Palestinian voices from the Canadian media. There were reports from whistleblowers inside CBC saying that they can't write certain things about Palestine that would be construed as pro-Palestinian. The censorship at these organizations has been through the roof. The firing of people, telling people they can't use certain words, including Palestine. I mean, it's ridiculous. But in terms of public intellectuals, I can't think of anybody that had a similar experience to the one you're describing.
It's interesting. What about campus repression?
Oh yeah, that was big. Politicians, including provincial premiers, calling for police to attack the campus protests. Really? Yeah, and then I mean, even pro-Palestinian marches. I mean, going through Montreal, going through Ontario, the police repression has been massive in some cases. There was one recently, I believe, in Montreal, where police just went in swinging to a pro-Palestine march. I think they broke a woman's jaw. I mean, they were like holding people down and hitting them. It was absolutely crazy.
The Mounties?
And, I don't know if it was the Mounties or the provincial police, but I mean, wouldn't surprise me if it was the Mounties. That wouldn't be out of character for them.
I grew up watching a cartoon called Dudley Do-Right. You've just ruined my whole perception of the strong-chinned Canadian Mountie.
Sorry to do that, but I mean, that's part of the Canadian mythology too, is taking this repressive police force and turning it into almost like a cuddly symbol of Canadian niceness.
Oh man, Pascal, do you remember Dudley Do-Right?
The Royal Canadian Military Police?
Yeah, and he had the strong-ass chin.
Of course.
I think that's true. I think that was way before Owen's time.
It's like one of the earliest examples of youthful propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
We ate it up, man. We ate it up, Owen.
Propaganda gets to you, man. I'll tell you, man.
So I'm assuming you didn't have any Canadian propaganda cartoons when you grew up.
Not cartoons, no. Definitely not any cartoons about cuddly Mounties that I can remember. That is disturbing.
With a strong-ass chin.
Dudley Do-Right. It's true. It's a real cartoon.
He's got his chin. Yeah, he's got balls on his chin, but there's a really strong chin. Dick face.
Oh, my God.
Owen, you and Eve discuss how Canada has helped propagate neoliberalism by backing coups that destabilize left-leaning governments, such as the 2012 ousting of Paraguay's Lugo. What role has Canada played in promoting neoliberal economic policies in the global South? I believe you guys are right. Canada's foreign policy has consistently prioritized neoliberalism over democracy, supporting the removal of governments that threaten corporate interests.
Yeah, so one aspect of Canada promoting neoliberalism is the coups, like you mentioned, the actual passive or active subverting of these left-wing governments. They're promoting alternative development paths. So that's a very key aspect of it. There's also the promotion of privatization and structural adjustment through organizations like the IMF or the World Bank. So as these organizations were kind of going to African countries, going to Latin American countries in like the 60s and the 70s and 80s, Canada was often there kind of keeping an eye on the negotiations. So there was one example of Tanzania in the 70s when the government there was mulling accepting an IMF structural adjustment plan. And Canada contributed to that process by saying to Tanzania, if you don't accept the structural adjustment, we will withhold our aid to you. And this happened a few times across Africa. Canada saying, if you don't implement neoliberal policies, our aid to you is cut. And, Canada, it goes back to the early Cold War. To like 1950, there was something called the Colombo Plan that Canada implemented in Southeast Asia. The former British colonies were a focus of this, especially like what became Pakistan and India. Canada went to these countries, which at the time, there was a big worry that they would move to the left, that they would go into the socialist camp.
Mm-hmm.
Canada sent people to these countries saying, Canada will invest. Canada will promote infrastructure in these countries. This was often tied aid, so Canadian companies would benefit from these development plans. And the Colombo Plan, Canada's first overseas development aid budget, it was explicitly an anti-communist policy. There's a book by a guy called Keith Spicer. The book is called A Samaritan State. And in the first chapter of that book, he says that the only thing that motivated Canada's overseas development projects in the early Cold War was an ardent anti-communism. The Chinese Revolution had just happened, 1949. There was a fear that it would spread across Asia. So Canada went to these countries, said, we will invest if you don't go communist. And that developed into structural adjustment in the 60s, 70s, 80s, when Canada would say, if you don't go neoliberal, we will withhold our aid to you. And these are just two examples. There's also the coups, like you say. One of the more substantive chapters in the book is Venezuela, the coup attempt there, 2017 to the present. When Hugo Chavez came to power in Latin America, he was promoting an anti-neoliberal integration project through ALBA, through UNASUR. And Canada contributed to demonizing him constantly when he was in power. When he died in 2013, Stephen Harper celebrated it publicly. And then Maduro comes to power, still interested in these regional integration initiatives, which undermine the Washington Consensus in Latin America. So Canada gets really involved in the coup attempt there, the demonization, the funding of civil society groups tied to the opposition, actively organizing opposition politicians on the ground in Caracas because this government challenged the Washington Consensus in the Western Hemisphere. So there are so many ways that Canada promotes neoliberalism around the world. It's through supposedly apolitical development projects that are in fact tied to the expansion of this ideology and of these policies. There is working directly with the IMF and the World Bank to make sure that countries across Africa, for example, are forced to implement these policies. And then there's the coups, there's the sowing of instability, and there's the overthrow of governments in the hope that a new pro-neoliberal government will be restored in the overthrown government's stead.
Pascal, you want to add anything to that?
No, it's clarifying to me.
I did want to let Owen know what his national hero looks like. So here you go.
Oh God.
So, like I said, it's kind of maybe more of a butt chin, but it does kind of remind me of balls. And this is Dudley. This is Dudley Do-Right right here. And and this cartoon, which I didn't think was that big of a cartoon, was a major motion picture with Brendan Fraser. Reprising.
This is really nightmarish.
Snidely Whiplash is the bad guy.
Oh yeah.
Oh, so Dudley Do-Right was part of the Rocky and Bullwinkle show.
Oh, okay.
So there's a Rocky.
I don't remember him.
Very serious Cold War implications in that cartoon.
Yes,
very true.
Yes, this cartoon is getting us ready for what will become now. So just remember that it all starts with Dudley Do-Right, people.
And Canada played its part.
Yeah. And that they made Steven Crowder. Just remember that. Jordan Peterson.
That's right.
Yeah.
David Frum.
Proud Boys.
I'm you.
So man, that's a blast from the past. Like, where is Stefan Molyneux right now? Is he what is he doing right now?
Do we really want to find him?
I kind of.
I have no idea what he's been up to.
Is he working on the internet? He's the one that ratted you out to the feds.
You might be right about that.
He couldn't become as successful as Jordan Peterson. He just faded out. We can only let as many Canadian right wingers at a time.
I used to hate that guy so much just because he was so fucking dull.
David Frum is Canadian too.
He's a what Canadian?
David Frum is Canadian.
Oh, is he really?
David Frum is Canadian.
Yeah.
Oh.
He's actually more noxious than both of them.
You know, hey, you're not sending your best.
No, I was just gonna say you're welcome for these gems we're sending you.
You know, it's all worth it because we get Ryan Reynolds. He left you guys, and he's not looking back. Take that.
You got me.
And Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey's Canadian, isn't he?
I think so.
Is he?
I believe so. Look it up, Pascal. Is Jim Carrey Canadian?
I think he is.
Is there any black Canadians? There's no black Canadians, huh?
There are black Canadians. They have a Canadian family.
Those are Haitians.
They're black. What are you talking about? Haitians?
Whoa, this is the all ADOS hour. We're going to need you to stop talking that propaganda.
There's only Drake.
There's Africville in Nova Scotia.
What did you just call me?
There's tons of Caribbeans, Afro-Canadians. Toronto, they have a massive Carabana festival in Toronto every year.
Do they just have a regular eating grits festival? Because I don't want to hear about all the other festivals.
The Underground Railroad, if you know, there were hundreds of African Americans.
Why didn't they stay then? Because apparently they're not there.
Staying in Canada. They're in Canada.
They went to Nova Scotia, right?
Yeah.
Nova Scotia. There's a black Nova Scotian flag.
What does it look like?
Give it a Google. There is
no black Californian flag. You better take that Nova Scotian flag.
Those are some of the earliest settlements in Nova Scotia.
I'm not laughing at the flag, but I'm laughing at the flag. Black Nova Scotian comes up. What does that look like? There's just one. Black. Oh, interesting. You guys want to see it?
Sure.
Black Nova Scotia.
Red, black, and green.
There you go. Kinda. This flag is the reason why ADOS is real.
Wow. Look at that.
Red, green, and gold.
It looks very true.
This is the real. This is the white Nova Scotia flag right here. This
Yeah.
Okay. And this is, but do black people fly it?
I've only been to Nova Scotia once, and I did see it a few places.
Did you know not to go there?
I didn't know what it was at the time.
Did you find out real quick?
It's like the black Nova Scotian sundown town in reverse.
Hey there, dim boy, white boy.
Hey, listen, white boy, what are you doing here?
Oh no, do they have that oh God, do they have that accent? Because that would be horrible. Oh.
Want some poutine?
What do black Nova Scotians, are they like, that's white people poutine? This is black Canadian poutine. This
I have no idea. I'm on the prairies.
Okra and all poutine.
Yeah. Okra and our poutine. If Owen thought it was horrible enough for the Canadian government, now he's got all 47 black people in Canada.
There are more than 47 people in black people in Canada.
Hey, we already told you the Haitians don't count. You're not counting Haitians, man. Look, don't count.
They're more than just Haitians. They're Africans.
They don't count.
How do they not count? They're black. They're African. Dude, Haitians were calling themselves black in 1804.
Okay, you know
It's in
what?
the Constitution.
Well, those black ass Haitians are so rude here in Mexico.
No.
Every time I say hello to them, they just look the other way. I'm like,
Just 'cause they don't understand you.
really? I'm waving and everything. They don't wave in Haiti.
They might think you're like, cop, immigration.
A black immigration officer in Mexico? That is next level undercover. This is not 21
Talk
Jump
about
Street.
op. That'd be a perfect op.
Can
You're
you
looking more
imagine?
Mexican by the day. That's what it is.
Oh, when you have a very serious show as depressing as this one, there's no better way to end it than with some nice casual racism.
This was not how I expected the conclusion to go.
As soon as Eve leaves.
Someone said I knew Jason was a narc. I got a Susan. Have you seen that video I sent you where this guy goes into a weed shop and he's holding his phone like this? Right? He's walking in like this. He goes, "Excuse me, where can I get some actual marijuana?" The dude behind the counter is like, "I don't know what you're talking about. We don't sell that here." He goes, "I've heard you sell that here. Can you speak into my lapel?" I want to ask you this one last serious question.
Mhm.
You guys conclude by arguing that Canada's foreign policy is deeply intertwined with U.S. imperialism. How can the Canadian left respond to this history, and what are the prospects for a more independent and democratic Canadian foreign policy? Quote, for the Canadian left, the challenge is not just to critique U.S. imperialism, but to dismantle Canada's own role in maintaining global hegemony. Oh, did you not hear me? Owen?
Can you hear us?
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, this is a question. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Hello?
We can hear you. Can you hear
Okay,
us?
great. So, yeah, this is a question that has. Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So this question is something that the Canadian left has thought about for a really long time. Like back in the 70s, there was a leftist movement, kind of the left flank within the NDP, that called for an independent socialist Canada, basically saying that Canada needed to extricate itself from U.S. imperialism and create a new kind of economy in Canada, one that was not dependent on U.S. investment or on imperialist investments overseas. So there is a history of the Canadian left trying to think through this issue. And what that would look like today, I'm not too sure. I mean, there is this movement still in Canada among the Canadian left saying that Canada needs to remove itself from U.S. imperialism and stop exploiting countries around the world, stop exploiting communities within Canada itself, particularly Indigenous communities. So this tradition is very much alive. The actual blueprint for how to achieve this, I'm not too sure. I mean, we have the NDP still, our Social Democratic Party. It's very much entwined with imperialism at this point. We have the Communist Party, which is never going to win an election, even though its position is much more aligned with what I would like to see in Canada. So beyond agitation, beyond spreading knowledge about this topic, beyond really emphasizing the necessity of needing to extricate Canada from U.S. imperialism, create a new kind of Canadian economy. I'm not too sure how it would be achieved. I'm not a political strategist, but I do know that this is really essential to reclaiming Canada from capital, to creating a more just and more equitable Canada in the future.
Thank you very much. That was actually very beautiful. Every time you ask that question, a lot of people don't. I don't know. I really appreciated that answer.
Oh, thank you.
Wherever you guys are watching or listening to the show, there's a link in the description to Owen and Eve's book. Toussaint, thank you for putting this show together.
You're very welcome. Everyone should go back and watch Owen's previous episodes.
Yeah, that was so long ago. I was living in the Bay.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah. But no, it's a pleasure to have reconnected with you.
Absolutely. This was fun.
It's, you know, we love it when people end the show saying, "Hey, this was fun."
And I will have nightmares about that Mountie with the scrotum chin.
Him and all the black Nova Scotians coming to get you, like the Thriller video.
They're not like us. They're not like us. They're not like us.
Yeah, Kendrick Lamar is leading the charge. Damn, that would suck. Thank you very much, Owen. Have a very good night.
Thank you
for hanging out with us.
You too.
For those that are still watching, I will be in the champagne room. Who's joining me? Is it just going to be me? You guys going to check out on me? Are you going to join us, Pascal?
I'll come in for a short amount of time.
Thank you guys for checking everything out. If you're new here or returning subscriber, I can't even talk. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and if you haven't, if you're listening on Apple, you can subscribe and get access to the Champagne Room and hear all the past and present Champagne Room episodes. If you are a paid YouTube subscriber, you also get access to the Champagne Room as well, and the links are already up. And I think we'll be watching a little bit of a movie that I found on YouTube the other night, last night, that frightened me. I was watching it. Have you ever fallen asleep to the television? You know, YouTube just keeps playing videos. I was watching like some video about a movie. I wasn't watching anything serious, and then a movie was just on, and it was the most insane thing I'd ever seen. And that's saying a lot because it's coming from me. That I kind of shot up. I was like, "What the fuck is this?" But I kept falling asleep, so I was like, "Okay, we have to watch at least the first 10 minutes of this in the Champagne Room. And I need everyone else to see what I saw, and I need to know if it's as insane to you people as what it was to me." Is that fair?
Is it that weird movie you showed me a clip of? With the guy in the white denim, that was very scary.
No.
I don't do horror. I don't do horror, dude.
No, it's not a horror movie. It's not a horror movie. It is a movie of the 80s, and it doesn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense. The movie starts off with a reverse burn, and so it starts off black, and then it opens up, and you just see everything's clothed, but you see like kind of like a woman's cleavage, and you're like, well, that's weird. Fucking movie is this? And she's just kind of jiggling around, but she's trying on jewelry. And there's this older Asian man that's helping her try on the jewelry. I guess he's the jewelry store owner. And as she's jiggling and he's jiggling, and I was like, what the fuck movie is this? And then these ninjas come out of nowhere, and they have ninja stars, but instead of throwing the ninja stars are on a yo-yo.
Okay.
It's like, I don't think this director knows what a ninja is, because this isn't what ninjas do.
Wow.
It's insane. It was the most insane thing I've ever seen in my life. And I need other people that watch this show to watch it with me, to confirm with me that what I saw was indeed insanity.
Okay. Doesn't sound like we have a choice.
But it's not that scary thing. Did that scary thing scare you, Toussaint?
Nah, it was just weird.
It didn't scare you?
Dirty white denim. Weird. It's very icky.
I'm still mad you were just mad at the denim outfit.
Yeah, the outfit was horrible.
Like, it wasn't the frightening timbre of the voice or anything that the person was saying. It was the fact that they had out of season denim on.
Out of season?
Apparently.
It's been years since that's been cool.
Out of season, out of decade.
Kushlik says, was the movie a dream? I thought, Kushlik, that I was having a dream because I kept falling asleep, and every time I would wake up, crazier things were happening in that movie. But yes, you have to see these ninjas with the yo-yo. I don't know how. You have to see it. So the link's already up. If you want to become a patron, it's super easy. Patreon.com/BitterLakePresents. It's that simple. For $3 for the month or $30 for the year, you can have access to champagne rooms past and present and all the other good stuff that comes with being a patron. On that note, we are
Out.
Wait. We are
Out.
and we are